My name is Dr. Timmery. I am the LGBT Affairs contributing writer to Philly Weekly, and my last article was on the, this is going to be fun, abuse in LGBT relationships. So just starting from the beginning, the question is, what does abuse in an intimate partner relationship look like? Who commits it, and who does it happen to? Well, if you do a Google image search, what you're going to find is something like...
Nice.
I'm doing really well. Yeah. Something like this, where it's a man being physically violent or coercive towards a woman. Now, this talk is not to say that that's not important or that that doesn't happen. This is simply to say that abuse is not gender specific, and it is not specifically always physically violent. So this brings us to the first question of, like, how prevalent is this problem? Well, for a heterosexual woman, the odds of being stalked, raped, or physically abused by a partner in her lifetime is about 35%. For a lesbian, it goes up to 44. And for a bisexual woman, the odds are 61. But this is not simply a woman's problem. It also happens to men as well. And these are CDC numbers that might actually be higher than this because many men might fear reporting abuse that has happened to them because they fear looking weak, or they may not even realize what has happened would count as rape or sexual violence. So if this is so common, why is it underreported? Why don't we hear about it more often? Well, part of it is the idea of simply how we conceive of gender. So when we think about men and we think about women and the idea that there are only two, the limitations placed on people and what they're capable of, and also what they should be able to put up with and survive. And it's part of these ideas that allow abuse to be perpetuated. So not only does patriarchy tell men that they can abuse women in certain cases, but also tells men that they can't even be abused. So when we think about this stuff like that, we limit the ideas of what counts as abuse. It's not always physical. It also includes surveilling your partner, demanding you be able to look through their phone, demanding you be able to have access to their social media accounts, talking to your friends in order to group manipulate and coerce them. And when we see a couple like this in a fight, very few people are going to first think that's intimate partner violence, and they're even less likely to become involved. They're more likely to think in a same-sex couple that the abuse is mutual. This is part of homophobia. Obviously, anything that touches upon LGBT population is going to have to deal with this, and transphobia as well. But transphobia and homophobia are not simply external things that happen inward, but also an internal process. So if the world has been telling you that you're not good, and you don't have a lot of options, when the person you love tells you that, you believe it even more. And you can use the threat of outing someone to their employer, to their family, to the legal system if you have custody problems, as a means of maintaining control. Now, if you're a marginalized person, you're more likely to experience problems with drug abuse, homelessness, mental illness, etc., which are all further breeding grounds for abuse. It's that much harder to change your situation, to move out, to go to a different city, etc. And then you also need culturally competent resources if you're going to seek counseling for that substance abuse, etc. If they don't recognize your pronouns, if they don't use inclusive language, it's that much harder to be useful for you. So then we have the problem of calling the authorities. So marginalized people in general, less likely to call the police for a few reasons, not the least of which is that in a same-sex violence situation, the police are more likely to think that it's mutual and have in some instances put abusers and victims in the same jail cells.
Oh my God.
That's a real thing. And this is part of, in general, the LGBT community's problem with visibility. Some people are like, you can get married now and be in the military, it's all good, we're all equal. But that's not true. And we also don't see our stories. In movies and in TV, we don't have role models for healthy or even unhealthy relationship models, so we have less of an idea of what we should be looking for. And that is absolutely true, especially among young people who are first getting their idea in their first relationships. This is a quote from a woman I interviewed for the article, and this is the problem of tokenization. If you come from a marginalized community, you're worried about making the rest of your community look bad. So she called 911 and hung up. The point of this is not to say that LGBT relationships are bad or unhealthy. That's not the takeaway from this. The point of this story is that abuse does not know gender. That abuse is not a thing that men do, it is not a thing that happens to women, it is a series of behaviors. This is a cycle of control Specifically, this one is made for deaf populations, so it is different forms of use of privilege, force, coercion, economic abuse, sexual abuse, etc. These are the things that can happen in an abusive relationship. They don't have to all be there. But on the other hand, this is a more equitable relationship, where partners communicate with each other, they share resources and labor, they negotiate for a mutually beneficial outcome, and this is what all relationships should be looking for, gender regardless. So this is not hopeless. There are lots of options. Locally, if you or anyone you know is involved in an abusive relationship, the William Way LGBT Center, Attic Youth Center for folks who are younger, and then some of those other resources are culture specific for gay men, for trans folks. There are options. That slide went away really quickly, so you can email me if you want those. And thank you very much for your time.